a mid-engine, wedge-shaped machine born from the same design philosophies as Ferraris and Lamborghinis, yet priced for everyday enthusiasts. Sounds like a fantasy, right? Well, for thousands of drivers around the world, and especially here in the US, that fantasy was real. It was called the Fiat X19, and it was the ultimate poor man's Ferrari, a little wedge of Italian brilliance that dared to bring exotic car vibes to the masses. And today, we're diving deep into the story of how this tiny mid-engine coupe defied expectations, captured hearts, and became one of the most underrated sports cars of its era. To understand the X19, you have to start where almost no one expects, with boats. Yes, boats. The origins of this story trace back to the late 1960s, when legendary designer Marcello Gandini, the man behind icons like the Lamborghini Miura and Countach, was working at the famed Italian design house Bertoni. At the time, Italian roadsters often used the term barchetta, meaning little boat, to describe their open-top sports cars. Gandini took that idea literally. He studied the sleek, low-slung lines of vintage wooden speedboats like Chris Craft's and wondered, what if you could capture that same spirit in a small, nimble sports car? The result was a futuristic concept called the Auto Bianchi A112 Runabout, revealed in 1969. It looked like unlike anything else on the road, a wedge-shaped rocket with sharp edges, an open cockpit, and a dramatic styling bar that housed the headlights. It was part speedboat, part moon rover, and all Italian flair. The concept wasn't meant for production, but it caught Fiat's eye at the perfect time. Their 850 Spider was nearing the end of its life, and they needed a fresh, exciting replacement. Something youthful, something exotic, something that could make average drivers feel like movie stars behind the wheel. Fiat knew they had a winner on their hands, and in 1972, they unveiled the production version of that concept, the Fiat X19. With Gandini and Bertoni still leading the design, the car was every bit as dramatic as its concept had promised. Low, angular, and futuristic, the X19 looked like a miniature supercar. But this wasn't just about looks, it was about making high-performance design accessible. And nowhere was that mission more successful than in America. When the X19 hit US shores in 1974, it landed in a market that didn't quite know what to make of it. This was the land of V8 muscle cars and straight-line speed after all. But times were changing. The oil crisis of 1973 had sent fuel prices through the roof, and suddenly, lightweight, fuel-efficient European cars were more appealing than ever. And here was the X19, mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, beautifully balanced, and all for a fraction of the cost of a Ferrari or Porsche. It filled a niche no one else was touching. The only other car remotely similar was the Porsche 914, but even that carried a significantly higher price tag. Reviewers loved the X19. Car and Driver famously dubbed it the poor man's Ferrari, praising its sharp handling, nimble chassis, and exotic looks. It wasn't the fastest car on the road, but it offered something far more valuable, a taste of the supercar experience for ordinary people. And beneath its striking design, the X19 was far from a lightweight pretender. Its body was built from stamped steel panels into a rigid monocoque chassis, so strong in fact that it was one of the very few small cars that could meet strict US crash standards of the era without major redesigns. In fact, only the X19 and a Volvo model were able to pass those safety tests at the time, which is seriously impressive for such a tiny sports car. The suspension was equally sophisticated. Fully independent at all four corners with McPherson struts front and rear, the X19 delivered razor-sharp handling that made every corner a joy. It had solid disc brakes all around, a premium feature for a budget-friendly sports car, and its compact size made it wonderfully tossable. With an 85-inch wheelbase and a total weight under 1,940 pounds, the car felt eager and alive in your hands. Of course, there was one thing the X19 didn't have: horsepower. Its heart was a 1.3-liter inline-4, originally designed by former Ferrari engineer Aurelio Lampredi. Early European models put out a modest 74 horsepower, while US models, strangled by emissions regulations, made just 63. That wasn't going to scare any Mustangs at a drag strip, but it didn't matter. The X19 wasn't about brute force, it was about balance, control, and connection. You could floor the throttle coming out of a corner and the car would reward you with poise and precision rather than wheel spin and drama. As the years went by, Fiat made incremental improvements. In 1979, the engine grew to 1.5 liters, bumping torque and making the car more usable day to day. US versions gained Bosch fuel injection in the early 1980s, nudging power closer to 75 horsepower, while European versions held on to carburetors and squeezed out up to 90 horsepower. A new 5-speed manual transmission replaced the old 4-speed, improving acceleration and highway cruising. Styling also evolved, though the basic wedge silhouette remained pure Gondini. Early models featured slim chrome bumpers that gave the car a playful, delicate look, but US safety regulations soon required bulky 5-mile-per-hour bumpers, which muddied the design a bit. The biggest change came in 1979 when Fiat introduced integrated bumpers and softer lines that modernized the car's appearance. Despite these changes, the X19 never lost its distinctive character, a car that looked fast standing still even if it wasn't blowing anyone away in a straight line. By the early 1980s, though, the market was shifting again. Fiat's US presence was shrinking, and by 1982, the company pulled out of the market entirely. Production of the X19 was taken over by Bertone, which continued to refine and sell the car under its own badge. These later models featured improved rust-proofing, better interiors, and more reliable electrics. But the competition had caught up. Newer mid-engine sports cars like the Toyota MR2 and Pontiac Fiero offered modern engineering, similar thrills for comparable money. Yet through it all, the X19 kept a loyal following. By the time production ended in 1989, more than 160,000 units had been built, more than 100,000 of them sold in the US. In its early days, you could buy one for under $5,000, making it an absolute steal. Even as prices rose into the $15,000 to $20,000 range by the mid-80s, the X19 remained one of the most affordable ways to experience that exotic Italian magic. By the mid-1980s, the Fiat X19 was no longer the fresh-faced upstart it had once been. Competitors like the Toyota MR2 and Pontiac Fiero were bringing modern engineering, more power, and better reliability to the affordable mid-engine sports car segment. And yet, the X19 still had something they didn't: an undeniable soul. It wasn't just a car, it was an idea brought to life. A symbol of what could happen when cutting-edge design met everyday accessibility. Even as the automotive world raced forward, the X19 remained unapologetically itself. Light, nimble, and beautifully balanced. When Bertone took over production in 1982, they did more than just keep the dream alive. They refined it. Later X19s came with subtle improvements: better rust protection, upgraded interiors, and revised electrical systems, and small tweaks that made the ownership experience more enjoyable. But even with those upgrades, the writing was on the wall. Rising production costs, stricter safety and emission standards, and a rapidly evolving sports car market meant the X19's days were numbered. By 1989, after nearly 2 decades on the road, production quietly ended. And yet, its legacy was already sealed. The X19 had achieved something remarkable. It democratized the exotic mid-engine experience. Before it, mid-engine cars were reserved for the ultra-wealthy, the kind of people who parked Ferraris and Lamborghinis in climate-controlled garages. But Fiat, Bertone, and Gondini changed that. They proved that you didn't need a fortune to enjoy sharp handling, Italian design, and that intoxicating mid-engine balance. All you needed was a love for driving and a willingness to embrace something a little different. Even today, decades after the last X19 rolled off the production line, the car has a passionate cult following. Enthusiasts cherish it not for its power, because let's be honest, it never had much, but for the way it makes them feel behind the wheel. It's a car that begs to be driven hard through a winding mountain pass, one that rewards precision and finesse rather than brute strength. And most importantly, it's a car that tells a story. A story about Italian creativity and engineering, about a designer who looked at a speedboat and saw the future of sports cars, about a company willing to take a risk and bring that vision to life, and about thousands of everyday people who, for the first time, could experience a taste of the supercar dream without emptying their bank accounts. Of course, no car is perfect, and the X19 had its fair share of flaws. Rust was a constant enemy, especially in climates where road salt was common. Electrical gremlins were not unheard of, a charming Italian tradition, if you will. And while the chassis begged for more power, Fiat never really delivered it. Even the later 1.5-liter models barely cracked 75 horsepower in US spec, leaving enthusiasts to wonder what could have been with a hotter engine. Yet for many owners, those shortcomings only add to the charm. The X19 isn't about numbers on a spec sheet, it's about the experience. It's about the way the steering communicates every nuance of the road, the way the chassis stays flat and composed through a tight corner, and the way the engine, small as it may be, sings its heart out as you ring it towards redline. And let's not forget its design. Decades later, the X19 still looks stunning. Its wedge profile, low-slung stance, and crisp proportions have aged beautifully, a testament to Gondini's genius. Park one next to a modern car, and it still turns heads. People still stop and ask questions. Some even mistake it for a vintage Ferrari or Lamborghini, which, in many ways, is exactly what it always wanted to be. In the end, the Fiat X19 was never about being the fastest, the most powerful, or the most luxurious. It was about delivering something far rarer, pure joy behind the wheel. It was about democratizing a driving experience once reserved for the wealthy few and putting it within the reach of the average enthusiast. And in that mission, it was a resounding success. Today, the X19 stands as a reminder of a bygone era, a time when automakers were willing to take risks, when design and character mattered more than spec sheets, and when even a humble Fiat could make you feel like $1,000,000. It's a car that proved you don't need 500 horsepower or a six-figure price tag to have an unforgettable driving experience. All you need is a lightweight chassis, a mid-mounted engine, and a road full of corners. So, if you ever come across one of these little Italian wedges, whether it's sitting neglected in a barn or gleaming under the lights at a car show, take a moment to appreciate it, because this isn't just a forgotten Fiat. It's a piece of automotive history.